Hey, everybody. I wanted to do a little quick devotional on Daniel chapter 6 that's really supplementing the foundations class for the adults. So, quick 5 to 10 minutes devotional. Just kind of wanted to go through and highlight some things in this passage and make application where we need to make application in our lives in light of what's going on in our world today. So, I'm going to start off Daniel chapter 6, and we'll just kind of read a few verses and kind of exposit as we go. So Daniel chapter 6, there the scripture reads, "It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom." So here we see God bestowing favor on Daniel, and not in any small way. I mean, this is a huge amount of favor that God is working in the hearts of probably mostly unbelievers, and especially King Darius here. But he's working in the hearts. He's elevating Daniel to a very high and distinguished and lofty position. He is basically the ruler, aside from King Darius. And it says that in verse 3, an excellent spirit was in him. I mean, that's really profound. Daniel is one of the few people in Scripture where nothing negative or bad is said about him. It's just completely positive. And most people in Scripture, God's not afraid to paint a picture of both their good side and their bad side. You know, we think of King David, where it's said of him that he was a man after God's own heart. I mean, that's an amazing thing to be said about you. And that is said of no one else in Scripture. He was a man after God's own heart. And yet, as much as no insignificant sins. But Daniel here is just painted in a very high level of integrity. An excellent spirit was in him. And how many of us can say that about ourselves, that others see an excellent spirit in us? Are we living lives of integrity, where people look at us and see something different in us, and they want to ask us about that? Like, what is it about you? What's different? Tell me about what's maybe changed you from when you were living a life of sin, and now you're living a life of holiness. May God give us that spirit, because really that's the main power that's involved with this. That God is the one that gives us the grace to live a life of integrity. I mean, sure, we are to step out and to do work. We are to work out our salvation with fear and trembling, right? But it is God who empowers us and enables us, gives us the ability to live the Christian life. And going back to Daniel chapter 6, it says in verse 4, "Then the presidents and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him." So, in light of Daniel being elevated here, what do you think these 120 satraps and 2 other princes or kings or presidents are feeling about Daniel? You know, there's probably a lot of jealousy going on. They're not happy with this. And so they want to remove Daniel from his position. So they're thinking of ways, they're meeting and coming up with ways to remove him from his office, if you will. But the wonderful thing is they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful. And may that be true of us, that when people look at our lives, and look, we all stumble in many ways, but may the Lord give us the ability and the grace. May he pour out his grace upon us to where we are living faithful lives, where people look at us and they can find no fault in our lives. And it says, verse 5, then these men said, we shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God. Ah, there you go. So if people are going to find fault with us, it's going to be pointing the finger at our Christianity, right? Verse 6, it says, then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast in the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. It didn't take him long to sign that, you know. I mean, one thing that struck me here is he's just put Daniel in second in command, right? You would think if one was to be a wise king, you would consult with the man you just put second in charge. But, you know, I think pride gets the better of him here. And he's like, oh, yeah, that would be great. You know, everybody can come and worship me. It was basically equating him as deity, right? Being worshipped as a god. And who's not going to get puffed up when somebody comes and consults with you and says, you know what, we should make a decree that says nobody else should worship any other gods but you, king. You're the one that should be worshipped for the next 30 days. So I think pride got the better of King Darius here. Verse 10 says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had window in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. And that's really significant. It says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. And he says he got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. I mean, he didn't flinch. How many of us, if the president of our country issued a decree that said you're not allowed to pray to your God whatsoever, and you know what, we're going to have police officers patrolling your neighborhoods. If we see that, you're going to get basically executed, right? Because that's the equivalent here. Not arrested, you're going to be put to death. How many of us would not flinch and just continue to be faithful and leave the consequences to the Lord? Daniel just doesn't miss a beat here. He just continues his faithfulness. Prays 3 times a day. You know, and I imagine this isn't just a quick 5 minutes. You know, it's probably pretty lengthy, maybe 30, 60 minutes each time. So maybe 3 hours a day that he's continuing to pray to his God. I mean, he is second in command in this country. And you're probably going to be pretty busy, but yet he made time to pray to his God. And it says his window was open. I mean, he had the opportunity, like, well, maybe I'll just close the blinds. I won't keep my window open and I'll just pray in secret. You know, nothing wrong with that. There's no sin in that. But he didn't flinch. He's like, you know what? They want to see me, they see me. You know, and I'm going to leave the consequences to the Lord. So that's what he does. He brazenly and bold courage prays with the window open. And then verse 11 says, then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king, concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, not the second in command. Notice how they label him. Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And it continues, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that is it a law of the Medes and the Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. King Darius here is mad. And maybe our first instinct is to say he's mad at Daniel for not worshiping him. But I think he's more mad at himself for what he's just allowed himself to succumb to and be tricked and trapped into by these ringleaders, if you will. You don't set somebody in command, second in command of your country, that you don't trust and that you don't care for and that you don't highly regard. So once he realizes his major blunder, he is upset with himself. And then verse 16 says, Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. I mean, it doesn't say anything in here specifically, but we can just imagine if Daniel responded the same way here when he's arrested and thrown into the den of lions, if he responded the same way when he first knew the edict here and just continued to be faithful, I imagine he continued to be faithful, courageous, and bold, being arrested and then being told he's going to be thrown into the den of lions. It's just amazing faith here that we see in Daniel. And the king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. In other words, King Darius is saying, I've tried to look for a loophole and I messed up here, but there's nothing I can do. So your God has to save you now. And a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. So just kind of picture what's going on here. You have this, researchers have told us that this particular lion's den would have been somewhat of an open cave, if you will, that was maybe 6 to 10 feet tall and had a dividing wall in between where lions could come and go. And then they had a door in the middle of that dividing wall that they could open from above. But it wasn't like this enclosed cave. It was open, so everybody could see into it. And then from the side, you had a door where you could, put somebody in there. And basically that's what happened. That's Daniel's position now. And then verse 19 says, Then at break of the day, the king arose and went in haste. He's running. Went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? He's just waiting. It's like, please let him respond. But I'm wondering if he's just thinking he's going to hear silence because there's nothing left of him because he's been devoured by lions. But he gets a response. He gets a response. Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. I'm trying to picture what that was like for Daniel, to be in the midst of who knows how many lions. 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 or more. And to wonder if you were going to be devoured, seeing these beasts who have huge heads, huge teeth, huge claws, and they don't do anything. And then it says God sent his angel to shut the lion's mouth. I mean, what if this angel was present, visibly present with Daniel? And Daniel's just in awe of God's protection of him. Seeing this angel just, I don't know What that looked like as far as the angel literally keeping their mouths shut, or just by their supernatural power, is keeping these lions from even opening their mouths. But just amazing here. It says, so Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. This is one of the difficult texts in the Bible. I mean, these people, these ringleaders, not only are they thrown into the lion's den, but their children and their wives. Now, one could ask the question, is this young children or is this adult children? It doesn't say. And frankly, passages like this, we just have to trust the Lord. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is right? You know, and the soul that sins shall die, right? The wages of sin is death for every single human being. But regardless, sin has consequences, right? Sin can affect, when you sin, it can affect others and cause dire consequences to them as well. But it's amazing to think about here. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them. Before they even touched the ground, the lions are shredding them. I mean, it's a horrific picture here. And it says, verse 25, then King Darius wrote to all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. I mean, we see the work of evangelism here, right? Daniel doesn't even need to say anything, although he probably did. But just by his actions, his faith, King Darius is seeing what Daniel's God is all about. And he is, King Darius, whether or not he ever became a believer, he is giving God glory by acknowledging that God is the God of Daniel. He is the living God, enduring forever. And he is making this decree that all people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. He's calling all these people, you need to worship this God. Now, whether or not he's saying worship this God exclusively, it doesn't say. But he's giving God glory here and telling everyone, you need to tremble, you need to fear before the God of Daniel. And, you know, it's a great asset to live a life of integrity, live a life of faithfulness where people can see your life and ask you about your faith. We also need to preach the gospel as well, right? We need to make the gospel clear to people. But living a life of integrity and living a life of faithfulness gives you opportunities to share that gospel. And all that to say, with this particular passage, in light of what we're going through right now, this is such a great example of trusting in the Lord with our lives, with the outcome of our lives, with what's going on, trials, difficulties, this virus. God is sovereign. He is in control. In fact, I think what's going on now with this virus is making God's sovereignty being put on display. He is at work for his own glory, right? But all I have to say is God is sovereign. If you are his child, he is ruling over your life for your good, right? Now, things might be difficult. Things might be scary, but we can trust in him. May God give us the courage to have the courage of Daniel, where he just didn't flinch from his normal way of life, of living with integrity and faithfulness. No matter what was going on, he just continued to be faithful no matter what was coming at him. And so I just want to encourage you today to trust in the Lord, acknowledge that he's sovereign, realize he's sovereign, he cares for you. right? It's 1 Peter 5, cast all your care on him because he cares for you. He cares for you. Well, I thank you for listening, and we'll keep doing little passages of scripture that go along with foundations, and may you all have a blessed week. God bless.